Years ago, in times long gone past, ages, centuries, millennia ago, there was a legendary time in which the world was unraveled in a terrible, suffocating, miserable pandemic. And we needed a light of hope. We needed a spark. We needed something. And there was an event called the DC Fandome, where DC was going to come out and showcase not just movies, but trailers for shows and games and spin-offs and all sorts of things that they were working on. This was their chance to save us all. It didn't end up being quite what we were hoping it would be. You see, first, they revealed a game that people were not super in love with. People weren't super confident this would turn out super well. After the extended and extremely long intro sequence, it looked to be an interesting new Batman game, but it's a different Batman, so it seems to be in a different universe or a different timeline or something, but it's a Batman game. And we very quickly realized that this was the rumored game from Warner Brothers Montreal. And this was a co-op game. They were the team that worked on Batman Arkham Origins. They've always done kind of support stuff or secondary stuff in the same vein as like Rocksteady, but usually their own little spin. They just do their own thing. And a lot of people saw this and were like, okay, interesting. But the game had shifted. The game wasn't what people initially thought it was going to be. We all thought it was going to be co-op. We all thought it was going to be multiplayer. We all thought it was going to be live service, like crazy monetized, blah, blah, blah. Didn't end up actually being that. What we ended up getting was an interesting kind of amalgamation of a bunch of different ideas. It was a very, very different thing. And while people weren't like super stoked on it, they thought at least it looked a little interesting and maybe maybe it'll be fun. Who knows? At the very least, it seemed to be different than what we were kind of dreading it would be. So people were like, okay, I mean, it's probably not going to be great, but at least it's something, right? They've been working on something and now we see it. The trailer they dropped immediately after this, everybody immediately, I mean, this is what we saw. A slow logo reveal. People are like, what? Oh my God. It's Brainiac. From the creators of the Batman Arkham series, people start screaming. No way. No way. Rocksteady's back, man. At this time, it had been 5 years. Well, I guess 4 years because they did the VR game, but 5 years since their last big release. So people are like, they've been cooking. They've been off doing their own thing. There had been rumors at this time, which later we found out were not accurate, but there were rumors at this time that Rocksteady had been working on a Superman game, that Rocksteady had been working on various different things. We didn't realize that they were working on, a big co-op shooter, looter shooter thing. But we were like, it's Rocksteady. It's been 5 years. They've been cooking. They're going to have something awesome to show. And when they revealed it, people initially were pretty positive. I mean, they thought that graphically it looked really, really good.
Give me a sit rep.
I've got eyes on the target.
Air support is getting cut to pieces. Where the hell are you?
I'm going in. We lost the target! Repeat! Task Force X has lost the target!
Damn it! Argus 3 is taking heavy fire. Get to Park Ridge ASAP.
Don't worry, boss. We got this. Hey! Boomer! Lay down suppressant fire!
Keep it down, Hal. The ears are still ringing after that last Barney.
What is that? Australian for hangover?
I believe I can translate. Boomerang has a concussion from the enemy you missed in our last encounter.
Guess those teeth are sharper than your eyes, Shark Man. I never,
You never miss.
Never miss, yeah.
Looks good, right? Looks good. Yeah, none of this was in the game. It's okay. It's not okay, but still.
Ah, Waller's stupid alpha target. Who are we supposed to be killing again?
Alpha target, okay? The most important target. Oh my God.
Oh, look, it's Superman. The mighty Superman has just rescued that pilot.
What a show off. Beat it, Spandex! We're on a top secret assassination mission here.
No. No.
So, figure out who we're killing yet? Oh, fuck!
So, people were like, ooh, interesting. This could be cool. That would not age well, my friends. Over the course of the next couple of years, people were consistently surprised at a lack of reveals, a lack of clarity. And the more people found out about the game, the less enthused they were. So this was originally announced for 2022, which at the time was about a year and a half away. Plenty of time to polish it up, plenty of time to figure that out. Gotham Knights was scheduled for 2021. This was also at the time when everybody was getting their estimates wrong because COVID delayed things so much. So everybody was announcing way too early and revealing way too early. So it was a whole thing. But Gotham Knights would eventually release in 2022, October of 2022. And then Suicide Squad, of course, released earlier this year. Gotham Knights, at the time that it launched, got some more mixed reviews. The biggest problem for Gotham Knights when it came out was simply that it was really buggy. It was kind of broken for some people. Not even kind of, it just was. It ran really poorly. There were shader compilation issues. But it was a game. It wasn't a great game. I played through the whole thing. It was it's probably your quintessential 7.5 out of 10 when it's working properly. It's fine. It's even pretty good if you really like superhero games. It's nothing that's gonna blow you away. There's a ton of remnants of its former life, I think, as a live service game. There's a flood of crafting components. There's a flood of these different levels and things, and there's so many cosmetics in this game, it'll blow your mind. There are just dozens and dozens and dozens of outfits for each and every character. It's wild. And I think the reason for that was not necessarily out of the goodness of their heart, but I think what happened was that at some point they decided to pivot from making this a live service game where you're just straight up paying for loot boxes and paying for skins and all that. And they reworked it so that you could get all those items in game, and it just ended up flooding the player. It was an actual instance where I think there were too many cosmetics, too many pieces of armor that you'd have in your inventory at any time. It was just overwhelming. But the core combat was fine. Having different playable characters was kind of cool. It was fine. Nothing crazy. This UI always reminded me of a mobile game. It just seems very tappable, right? Very tappable UI. Yeah, you see the different skill trees. If I go back a few frames. So here you can see the inventory. Doesn't it look like a mobile game? I mean, come on. So you see the different levels. Each suit has different power and main status effects. And it seemed to me that they probably at some point had at least crafting components available for acquisition through some sort of monetized means. And at some point it pivoted off. I don't have evidence of that. It's just the game seems really weirdly designed if that wasn't the case. And good on them for pivoting off of it and not charging for gameplay affecting suits and cosmetics and things. Good on them, but it still is just a little weird. There's remnants of it still here. But the game ended up being fine. But everybody was okay, well, now, if this was fine, imagine what Rocksteady's cooking. If this is fine, what Rocksteady's doing, because they're such a better studio, is going to be amazing, right? And then we got Suicide Squad. And, as the years went by, we started seeing more and more trailers for it. More and more reveals of cinematics, of gameplay, of mechanics and things. And what was really surprising is that pretty much the entire game's cinematics are revealed in these trailers ahead of time. They kept saying, oh, this is the most cinematic experience we've ever put together. It has the most cutscenes by minute count of any game we've ever made. which I'm sure on by counting minutes of cutscenes, it's probably true, because those previous games didn't used to do full cutscenes. They would do these like gameplay cutscene things. And even then there weren't that many, and the games were fairly short, but they were very polished and very lean. But what was fascinating about Suicide Squad's marketing cycle was that it sort of went like, so what was interesting about it is that as time went by, their focus sort of shifted, because initially they were just going like, if you imagine the top half of this is like, let's just say, I have an actual tablet, I could just use that. The top half of this, let's just say, is like live service. And then the bottom half of this, let's say, is story stuff. Okay. So they were like, initially when they announced it, they were like, you should be excited for this because it's going to be, initially it was very ambiguous, but then they're like, it's a live service game. You should be so excited. And they were leaning really heavily into the live service thing, right? They were showing off the loot or the gear score, all the live service mechanics around the looter shooter stuff, finding different materials and crafting better stuff and re-rolling for better stats on your weapons and stuff. And the response was generally pretty negative, right? People really were not stoked on it. So they pivoted. And I made a video about this at the time where I said, if your game is actually pretty narrative heavy, sell it to players based on that. And then you might be able to trick some of them into playing the live service stuff. But narrative gamers will not connect with live service mechanics willingly. So like, if you want this game to sell, if you want it to be successful, you've got to find a way to reframe this from it's a great live service game into it's a narrative game that has live service elements. And sure enough, that's what they started to do. They started to pivot. So they shifted off of that. Remember, they delayed the game by about a year. It was like February or March of 2023 that they revealed that first gameplay thing that was just super, super poorly received. Just shooting the big purple glowing zits. Everybody lost their minds, hated it. And so they delayed it almost a year. And when we started to see it again, all of a sudden the marketing campaign was all focused on narrative stuff. They had pivoted off of the live service pitch primarily. And as we got closer to launch, they started trying to reframe it because they're like, hey, this is a live service game, so let's settle down. But what ended up happening is that you had a bunch of players who had seen it revealed here and were not stoked on that idea. And then you had people who were exposed to it over here. And as we got closer to launch and they started bringing up more of the live service stuff, they were less and less about it because they're like, this is not what I would like, this isn't what I wanted. And sure enough, like as people were looking for this in the game, because again, they kept saying it has the most cutscenes by minute count of any game we've ever made. It's still from Rocksteady, the narrative team that brought you Arkham City and Arkham Knight. They kept reframing it that way. And sure enough, when we got it, there were maybe an hour and a half worth of actual narrative stuff. And beyond that, it was all just grinding the same missions over and over again. And then even for the season 1 update, there was a 2-minute, 53-second, I think it was, cutscene when you got the Joker, and that's it. That's it. Less than 3 minutes of narrative content. It's crazy. But they had pitched it as, well, but it's just as narrative, or it's from the same narrative team that brought you Arkham Knights, so you should be really stoked about it, and it's going to be awesome. But it just goes to show you how dangerous it is to set up false expectations, which is what happened. You know, I had said initially, yeah, you should focus on the narrative. If your game is actually narrative heavy, sell it based on that. Don't try to sell it on the live service stuff nobody's excited for. Try to sell it on the stuff people do like and the things that people connect with your studio over. But instead, they had built almost exclusively a live service game. The narrative was certainly an afterthought. And so we just ended up with a confused game that pitched itself on both sides of a very polarizing fence. If the black line is a fence, it's literally both sides of it. And so they just ended up not making anybody particularly happy. And amazingly enough, the legacy of Gotham Knights versus Suicide Squad is that Gotham Knights actually ended up being a better game. There was just more stuff there. It was far less repetitive. And while it wasn't great, and while I found the like plot twist ending to be asinine, I thought at the very least it was a game that was fine. And that's unfortunately more than can be said for Suicide Squad. Like, It was a package that made sense, I think, at that price point or a slightly lower price point. But Suicide Squad is just a baffling mess of a game. And at no point, like, you see that initial trailer from 4 years ago, and you're like, how on earth did they go and spend 4 more years after that working on it? And they could only manage like 2.5 hours of content that they repeated for 10 hours. And then a seasonal update that has a 3-minute cutscene. And then they give you a playable character with no new missions or anything. It's just stunning. Like, no part of it makes sense. It's baffling. And unfortunately, I think that's going to be the legacy, is that like Gotham Knights is a decent game. Suicide Squad is a game that doesn't make any damn sense at all. It's just crazy. Mr. Steelio Kill, thank you for the 2. Suicide Squad makes Gotham Knights look better. Yeah, I mean, everything is a matter of contrast, and you just don't know what you got till it's gone. And it's just really funny that we all just assumed that Gotham Knights was going to be the inferior product because Rocksteady's Rocksteady. But it goes to show you guys, you cannot assume anything. You can't assume anything in the gaming industry. If you assume that, well, Cyberpunk 2077 is going to launch amazingly well. They made The Witcher 3. How would Cyberpunk be bad? And then we get it and it's like, oh my God, okay. And, you know, the same thing goes for Rocksteady. It's a world-renowned studio. They made some of the most successful games of the 2010s. There's no way that they blow this, or I guess it's even pre-2010s, because Arkham City was 2011 or 2010. So like that 5-year period, 6-year period, they made some amazing games. We just assumed that they would also make a great thing here, but nope. Same thing happened to BioWare. Yeah, a lot of people were like, oh, Mass Effect Andromeda is going to be amazing, because they made, I believe, Dragon Age Inquisition won Game of the Year in 2014. They had released some amazing games prior to that, you know, with the Mass Effect trilogy. Granted, Mass Effect 3, people had mixed responses to say the least, but still, they had made some amazing games. And then they've just had 2 consecutive flops back to back. You just can't assume anything. And it's why, like, shocker, it's why I think being skeptical, it matters. Because usually when a game is going to be bad, there are warning signs. Usually there are things that are sticking out like a sore thumb that you can point to. Like when we saw Cyberpunk 2077 at E3 in 2019, like a year and a half before it launched. I remember, like, granted, it was very work in progress, but I think my video at the time when I got back from E3, I said that they played it very safe because none of the stuff that they showed was particularly amazing, and it wasn't as exciting as the trailers had made it out to be. It seemed like a combination of a bunch of different concepts of games, but it really did not have that magical quality we saw in the trailers. It just looked like a video game. It didn't seem that remarkable. There were also like technical issues and stuff, but of course it was work in progress, so whatever. And if they had been more transparent, we would have seen a lot more red flags. But even like with Cyberpunk, when we started to see that they were holding back reviews, that they weren't letting people review the last gen versions, that they were still selling, those were all red flags that stood out, and people rightly started calling out people who brought it out or refused to bring it up. So I think you just shouldn't assume anything when it comes to the gaming industry, because things can change over and swap very, very quickly. You should evaluate like the social cachet of developers and publishers, because naturally, if you make consistently amazing games, the odds are much higher that you'll make a great game the next time. It's not a foregone conclusion. You shouldn't bet your life savings on it. But like From Software, the odds are pretty good that the Elden Ring DLC is going to be pretty good. The odds are pretty high that whatever game comes after that is going to be pretty good. They just have demonstrated that they know what it takes and that they do a good job. Is it possible that they release a broken, buggy mess that's just terrible and uninteresting, and then somehow Joel ends up in it and Joel gets killed again? Sure, that's technically possible. You shouldn't like cynically assume that that will happen, but it's technically possible, and you should always acknowledge that. Because again, there's been developers that you would have been like, there's no way that they blow their next game. After Arkham Knight, there was no way anybody thought that the next Rocksteady game would be a colossal flop. Nobody would have thought that after The Witcher 3, CDPR would blow The Witcher or Cyberpunk 2077, but it does happen. Even with BGS, the idea that coming off of Skyrim, their next game would be sort of like a mixed bag of good and bad with Fallout 4, and then they would totally blow it with Fallout 76, and then Starfield would end up being a disappointment for most people. You never would have assumed that. But I think it's just because most developers, have peaks, and then they have valleys, and then they peak again, then valleys. You know, they have ups and downs because it's a team of people, and people have pros and cons, people have ups and downs. And so you should never think that any studio or publisher is infallible, because they'll always screw stuff up. Even big studios like Rockstar, they'll put out an amazing game like Red Dead 2, and then they try to do an online mode for it, and it's just a total disaster, and they abandon it. So it's going to be, I think, moving forward in the industry, we just always have to remember anything can implode. Just be cautious, try to be as fair as possible. And when it comes to games like Gotham Knights, maybe the legacy of Gotham Knights is that maybe we should appreciate even the 7s and the 8s out of 10s, because they very quickly can turn into 3s and 4s if you're not careful. Very quickly.